LinkedIn News.
If we constantly focus on perfecting ourselves, we're never ever going to feel like we're enough. And that goes to the root what perfectionism is, a deficit, right?
That's Thomas Curran, professor of psychology at the London School of Economics. I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better. Stay tuned for more on the trap of perfectionism and how to get out of it. Hey everyone, from LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, and this is Everyday Better, a personal development podcast where every week I sit down with some of the world's brightest minds and bravest hearts who use science and story to share strategies for how we can flourish individually in relationship to others and the world around us. So I have a question for you perfectionists out there. When was the last time you were praised for your perfectionism at work or in your family? How about the last time you patted yourself on the back for it, even wearing it like a badge of honor? Okay, no shame here. I've done the same thing. But if, like me, you've expended a bunch of energy concerned about how perfect you are at work, how perfect you look or feel or behave, you know that perfectionism is far from an enjoyable experience. Today, we're exploring the trick and trap of perfectionism with Thomas Curran. He's a professor of psychology at the London School of Economics and the recent author of The Perfection Trap: Embracing the Power of Good Enough. Thomas is a recovering perfectionist himself, so his book and research talk about the origin of perfectionism, how it's really coming from a feeling of deficit, and how the more we try to hide behind it, the less connected we actually feel to others. Now, this topic is a complex one because perfectionism feels self-protective. But when it comes to our emotional well-being and the ways we do or don't flourish at work, it is just not a sustainable practice. Plus, perfectionism isn't harmful to just you as a perfectionist. It also harms the people around you, your colleagues, your family, your community, not to mention your future self. Here's Thomas.
I really wanted to write a book to dispel a few myths about perfectionism that had sort of accrued as I'd done the work in the area. I mean, I come from a psychology background, did a PhD, so I'm in the weeds of this topic and do a lot of lab-based studies and all that sort of stuff. But when I got out of that bubble, started to talk to people about perfectionism, one of the things that became evident to me was that we kind of see it as a badge of honor, like something that we carry around with us as a signal of strength. And it didn't sit right with me because that conflicted with the work I was doing. I was showing time and time again that perfectionists really struggled. They had a lot of mental health difficulties. They would procrastinate a lot. They would worry about small things. They would overgeneralize mistakes and all this negative behavior. And so I really wanted to know more what's going on as a society. Are we taking on perfectionism more and more? And if so, is that maybe a warning sign that there's something awry here? So I did a big study showing perfectionism is rising, which kind of chimed with my anecdotal experiences. And then suddenly there was a lot of press interest and I did the TED Talk and finally here I am writing the book. So that's the journey.
Yeah. You talk about the fact that perfectionism actually has roots in feelings of deficit.
Yeah, it's so important you start there with perfectionism.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you can get confused between similar traits, things like conscientiousness, meticulousness, diligence. All these things are great. But perfectionism is differentiated from those things by its starting point, its deficit starting point. Perfectionism is ultimately about not feeling like we're good enough, not feeling like we are competent, feeling at some level deep down that we have shortcomings. And really it's about trying to repair those shortcomings, trying to conceal those shortcomings from the world. And that's where all that energy comes from. That looks like conscientiousness.
It does,
all that tinkering, iterating, it's nervous, anxious energy. And on the surface, it can look like high standards, but actually it's insecurity. And that's, once you start there with perfectionism, you can really begin to unpack what it does to us and how it impacts on things like performance and well-being.
So, okay, I want to go like a little philosophical here because you're saying then perfectionism is a challenge of essentially like self-worth, right? Or self-confidence.
It is, yeah, but it's a fragile sense of self-worth. It's a very contingent sense of self-worth. Perfectionistic people overvalue their accomplishments, how they look and appear, and undervalue themselves. So it's a constant battle, really, with the world, trying to prove to other people that
I'm enough.
I'm enough. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm okay. And it expresses itself in this sense of need for reassurance. So we're constantly trying to get reassurance from our bosses or our family members or our friends or whatever it might be. People pleasing is really a very strong facet of perfectionism, trying to make sure that other people like and appreciate us. Worries and hypervigilance about mistakes and self-presentational concerns, all sorts of anxious energy that is associated with how we look and how we appear in the world. This is very common traits of perfectionistic people, and it's all rooted in a fragile sense of self-worth.
So we don't start that way, right?
No.
So something happens at some point to us that puts us on that path. And I'm speaking for myself and others as a perfectionist.
Absolutely. And I think this is something that gets conditioned into us as we develop, right? Because we're told by messaging all around us that in order to be an acceptable and competent and worthwhile human being in this world, that we have to achieve, that we have to conform to certain social standards of image or appearance. We have to make sure that we're excelling in school and college. You need to make sure we have the right friends and we're having the right lifestyles. And it doesn't.
God, that's heavy.
It's well, if you look around you though, like all you're bombarded with these days, whether it be social media or television documentaries, is how we should be living, right? How we should be appearing. Curran, a psychoanalyst in the 40s and 50s, wrote about the tyrannies of should. And I think she was right then. And if she was around today, she would be even more right today, because this is what we're exposed to all the time. So we grow up essentially not worried at all about how we appear or what people think of us, and we suddenly get to adulthood and those things are forefront in our mind. So of course perfectionism becomes a part of our identity, because really perfectionism is about bridging the gap between the imperfect person with shortcomings, person with foibles, person who has limitations and all the rest of it, and the perfect person we're trying to project into the world. That's perfectionism, really carrying across that gulf. And all of us at some level, I think it's unavoidable. I think we will all carry around some of that. Now, some people have a lot, some people have a little bit, but I don't think in today's society anybody can truly said to be having no perfectionism.
Are we conscious of it all the time?
No, we're not conscious. It reminds me of H.G. Wells's short story, The Land of the Blind. It's a story about an explorer who falls into a valley where miraculously he survives, but he finds himself surrounded by an undiscovered tribe who are blind. They can't see. He thought that he would be the king of the blind because he could see. That would be his superpower. But actually what he found was sight means nothing to people who have never seen. Right? And this is something that I often think about in modern society, that we don't think perfectionism is abnormal or something that should be avoided or perhaps curbed, because everybody is the same way, right? All around us we see limitless images of perfection, so we all kind of fold into the same idea that we need to have high standards, we need to excel, we need to strive all the time, not understanding or recognizing perhaps the full extent of the damage that can do to us both as individuals and as society.
What got you to this point of going, I've got to look into this from a personal perspective versus just kind of like looking out in the world and seeing perfectionism?
One of the things that I was aware of when I was, particularly in my early 20s, when I was pushing myself really, really hard, was that yes, I was succeeding, but it was coming at a tremendous cost. Like I never felt like I had a life, really. I was moving around so many times from different cities, different continents even. I never had any friendship groups or strong community because you just keep moving time and time again. And before long, I was experiencing a lot of burnout. And so, it was a professional interest, but it was also a personal one too. And once it became evident to me perfectionism was actually holding me back way more than it's carrying me forward, it became a bit of a mission, I suppose, to try to figure out what on earth this thing is, why it is that it has all of these really curious, often contradictory outcomes, and why it is that not just me, but everyone around me just seems to carry this intense need to prove themselves all the time, which comes at a heavy price.
It's also this feeling of aloneness in it, that like, oh, it's me and I have to do this and I'm the only person who maybe is feeling like a perfectionist, and everyone else maybe isn't feeling that. So that even like puts your walls up even more to make you feel like you really got to protect this thing, right? This fragile sense of like, okay, am I good enough? Can I make this work? Is this going to be as amazing as I think other people think it's supposed to be? And that's like another assumption we're putting on everyone else, that like we have to be perfect in order to be liked.
It's really nice of you to bring up the social piece in terms of how you can actually feel quite alone with perfectionism, because you're absolutely right. Perfectionism is problematic for a number of different reasons. It makes us work too hard. We feel a lot of guilt and embarrassment and shame, particularly when we made mistakes. But what isn't, I don't think, mentioned enough or talked about enough when it comes to perfectionism, how it disconnects us. It's very alienating, perfectionism. It makes us, it removes us from ourselves so that we're trying to be somebody else, somebody perfect, and that creates a lot of inner conflict. But it also alienates us from other people because we're trying so hard to maintain this perfect facade that gets in the way of authentic interactions with other people, because we're constantly in that interaction thinking about how we're being perceived and whether we're saying the right things or doing the right things, right? So we don't talk about this element of perfectionism enough, but I think you've really hit on a very, very important piece of the perfectionism puzzle, and that's that it can alienate us from other people, and that can create a lot of loneliness, social disconnection, which is one of the reasons why it can create a lot of psychological problems too.
So I want to jump around because I do want to go back to where it comes from, but I also really want to hear your thoughts on two things. One is perfectionism and procrastination. I never would have realized that those two go together because you assume that, well, real perfectionists get everything done. So I was shocked to hear perfectionism and procrastination go together. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I guess it is puzzling at first. And I think we go back one step. So one of the things that perfectionism time and time again seems to show in the research is that perfectionists put in a lot of effort. They work really hard. We know that. But that work doesn't seem to translate into higher performance, because when you look at the relationship between perfectionism and performance, it's negligible, non-existent.
That's wild.
That's crazy, right?
That is like, yes, that's like one of those things where you're like, wait a second, I thought I was taught to be a perfectionist as a child so that I could perform.
Yeah. Now, even someone like myself who knows the cost of perfectionism, but has seen in my own life that it has had at least the benefit of making me successful, or at least contributing to that success. To see it hard in the data that it doesn't was crazy. But this is where the procrastination piece comes in, because when you actually start to unpack the relationship to perfectionism and performance, you start to see that it can block progress. So perfectionists work really hard, that's true, but they work too hard. They'll obsess and obsess and obsess so that they create more work for themselves unnecessarily, which creates a lot of burnout, and that's what we see in the literature. But they also do something really curious too. They don't just burn out in heavy measure, they also self-sabotage. And this is where the procrastination piece comes in, because perfectionists, they function reasonably well under conditions of predictability, where there are outcomes that they can control. But when you take them out of that comfort zone, this is where things start to get a bit messier, because once they encounter challenge or they fail, particularly if they fail publicly, you tend to see an avoidance mindset. They go into a safety zone, perfectionists, to try and avoid those feelings that come from failure, shame, guilt, embarrassment. They've shown a weakness to other people that are trying to conceal. That hits their self-esteem hard. They feel worse about themselves, and they start to wonder, have people seen? And what that means is that those feelings are so intense that they don't want to encounter or put themselves in situations where they're going to be exposed in that way. So they tend to withdraw or withhold their effort. See this time and time again in the lab. If you put them in a situation of failure, then tell them, don't worry though, you can have another go. They just don't try the second attempt, because you can't fail at something you didn't try. And if you put everything into it and still don't make it, that's going to look bad on you.
And you're a failure, yeah.
And it doesn't just look like avoidance, because we can't just avoid stuff at work. We have to get stuff done. What you'll tend to see with perfectionists is they do a very curious thing when it comes to procrastination, where they're given a hard task, find very quickly that they are unable to do it or find it really challenging cognitively. And so they then switch to easier tasks to distract themselves from that hard task. So they might send emails.
God.
they might check in with a client. They might check in with a client. They might the things that
you feel busy.
Yeah, you feel busy. It makes you feel better in that moment. But of course, you just damage yourself by the passage of time, because you're not getting done what needs to be done. And this is a very common trait of the perfectionists that do this time and time again, see it in the literature. And we think that's also why perfectionism doesn't translate into success, because they're Overstrivers work too hard, burn out, but they also engage in self-sabotaging behaviors that block progress.
So as I'm thinking about this, I used to, this is kind of odd, but I would say to myself, well, if I procrastinate, then am I a real perfectionist? Like I feel some of the perfectionist tendencies, but those two don't go together. So because you're blending these two together, you're also making me realize that perfectionism is really mentally taxing. So you spend a lot more time doing the mental gymnastics and taxing yourself mentally, so your energy goes down. So it's almost like the burnout isn't because you're doing all the work. It's really probably happens in those moments where you're just turning it over and over in your head.
Well, the worry is expensive. It preoccupies us. It creates a lot of exhaustion, but it's completely non-productive in a sense that it's redundant energy because it's not carrying us forward. So the best thing you can do, and this isn't an overnight fix, is but just to try to expose yourself to a little bit of stress and anxiety. So for instance, if you're constantly worried about seeking reassurance, just promise yourself tomorrow that you're not going to go into the office, send off a project or a talk or a piece of code or whatever it might be, and then go straight to the common area of the kitchen and start to just prod at whether that was enough, or whether that was okay, or was it good, like just promise yourself you're not going to seek that reassurance and not worry about it. That's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to engender a lot of anxiety and worry because you're going to really want to know whether what you sent was okay. But the more you get used to just letting it go, not worrying about it, moving on to the next thing, the easier that becomes. And then you can scale that up to bigger things. You can expose yourself to bigger challenges, things that test your perfectionism in bigger ways, like giving a talk maybe if you don't feel that public speaking is your skill set, but just put yourself out there and do it. That's going to create a lot more anxiety, but it is going to be important because it's going to help you grow, number one, but it's also going to challenge your perfectionism. Your perfectionism is the only thing that's holding you back from doing that, from putting yourself in that room and giving a talk, because you think, what if it goes wrong? But sometimes you just got to feel that fear and do it anyway.
Before we go to break, let's recap. Perfection and productivity do not go hand in hand. Perfectionism stops action and invites avoidance. So instead of worrying about how to get it perfect, make moves to get it started and trust that you'll improve along the way. We'll be back in just a few minutes. And we're back with Thomas Curran. I want to backtrack to causes because there was a really surprising cause to me that you talked about when it comes to perfectionism, which is genetics.
Yeah.
Tell me about how genetics is involved with perfectionism.
Well, the way we turn out is massively influenced by genetics. About half the way we turn out in general is influenced by genetic factors. And a lot of research shows the same for perfectionism. About a little bit less than half, maybe 30 to 40% is inherited. But that can be amplified or it can be silenced depending on the environment. And this is why perfectionism is a spectrum, right? If you have somebody who's predisposed to perfectionism, it's likely you're going to see that perfectionism expressed in a quite influential way in their lives. Whereas if somebody is less disposed to perfectionism comes into the world, I think they're still going to feel those forces, but not in the same intensity as someone who's has, a high maybe level of inherited neuroticism or inherited perfectionism, in which case that would, I think, would create more of a difficulty. So, it's not nature, it's not nurture. We have to think about personality development as an intricate blend of the two and look not only at the genetic factors that we start life with, but also the social factors that we develop into.
You said there are 3 types of perfectionism, right? There's the self-oriented, socially prescribed, and then there's the other-oriented perfectionism. I want to understand that in relation to like genetics and culture.
Well, let's back up a minute. Let's define them first, and then we can go into the explanation. So self-oriented is perfectionism is a form of perfectionism that comes from within. So it's a high self-set drive to be perfect and nothing but perfect. It comes with self-criticism, but it's the quintessential overstriver. It's, the workaholic and all the rest of it. Socially prescribed perfectionism is a form of perfectionism that comes from outside. So not only do I feel like I need to be perfect, but I also feel that other people expect me to be perfect. So a lot of that inner drive is also coming from social factors, and the world around me is expecting perfection, and people are waiting and they're watching and they're going to pounce and let me know when I haven't been perfect. So this is called socially prescribed perfectionism. And the third is other-oriented perfectionism. That's perfectionism that's turned outwards onto other people. So I expect you to be perfect. If you're not, I'm going to let you know. I'm sure a lot of listeners have perhaps had a boss or someone in their life that expresses those other-oriented tendencies. You know, you know because you don't forget them. And this is what Freud would call projection, this projection of high standards, excessive standards onto other people. If I'm pulling myself over hot coals to make sure I'm getting exceptional
You're going
standards,
over them too. Yeah.
got to do it too. That's only fair, right? So those are the three forms of perfection you see time and time again in the therapy room and also through empirical work. Now, we know that there is a strong genetic piece to all three of those. Socially and self-oriented are about 30 to 40%, other-oriented a bit less so. We also know from that research that if you're predisposed to self, you're also predisposed to social and vice versa. And so what we think is happening is you're born with a predisposition to perfectionism more generally. And then as you interact with the world, that perfectionism starts to show itself, whether it be self-oriented, if you're in a very, let's say, meritocratic, focused part of the world where there's an emphasis on personal striving and achievement.
That would be here for sure in the US.
And that's what we see in the data, high levels of self-oriented perfectionism in US populations. Whereas if there's a more focus on social conformity and applying ourselves to rules and norms, particularly when it comes to family, you might see socially prescribed perfectionism being more dominant in those sorts of cultures. Now, that's the interaction I'm talking about between perfectionism that we're born with and then the environment that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, and you've talked about the impact on not just people at work, but people who are in school, standardized testing. Do you see a difference in the level of perfectionism or the rise in perfectionism based on age or generation?
Yeah, definitely. We're seeing a lot of perfectionism in younger generations. What's really interesting in the data is you're seeing a very strong pickup in socially prescribed in America, Canada, and the UK right now.
Shocker.
In fact, so much so that it will overtake self-oriented as a dominant form of perfectionism in 25 years if our models are to be relied upon, and that's not guaranteed. But what that shows us is something really interesting. You know, in the nation of the hyper-individual, pull yourself up with a boost, perhaps the American dream, the country of meritocracy, we're starting to see socially imposed pressures to conform to social standards being felt much more heavily among younger people. I think it's a really interesting trend. It's worrying because socially prescribed perfectionism is the one that's most extreme. It has the strongest correlations with mental health difficulties. So for sure, we're seeing a lot of that right now in younger people, and that's expressed in all sorts of different ways: concerns about mistakes, doubts about actions, this idea of fake it till you make it. This wasn't something that our parents had recognized as a way of interacting with the workplace, but this is a kind of new generation of young people who have very different traits, and one of them is much higher levels of perfectionism.
And what can we do? I mean, as older generations who are, I mean, I would definitely say I'm someone, like I've said, who experiences perfectionism. You do too. So we have been impacted by it. But as we're watching younger generations come up through the education system, start work, go through college, all of that, what can we do as, teachers, parents, people who can influence them to kind of counteract what the society or the socially prescribed perfectionism is saying?
Yeah, I think the main thing is to provide safety. And, that doesn't mean no challenge. That doesn't mean that we can't push our kids or our employees when it's necessary. But that does mean that we're providing them an environment where they can feel safe to fail, to make mistakes, to put up their hand and ask a stupid question. There are no stupid questions around here. That should be a mantra for a firm. Also, fake it till you make it is not acceptable around here. We're going to learn it till we make it. And that's the most important thing. Perfectionism is instilled in the household, in schools, and in workplaces, almost from the get-go, right? If you start a new job, you've got a docket of inductionary materials that show how high-performing the firm is, how high-performing our employees are, right? This instantly creates
How can you be the high performer?
Yeah, exactly.
And
Almost
if you're not, you're invisible. Yeah, totally.
From day one, we're like emphasizing and amplifying this kind of idea that we need to excel at all times. And it's the same in schools, right? You get young people going to schools, they know it's so important to get high grades because that's going to impact on their future. So if they're bombarded almost from day one with standardized test after standardized test, giving so much feedback about how they're doing relative to other people, which can be really scary, there's a constant need, even if we do well, we don't feel like we can stop there. We've got to keep doing it. We've got to keep getting an A, and then another A, and then another an A. And then, of course, that gets down to parents too. They feel that as well. So they're constantly making sure that their expectations are at a level that their kids don't slack, right? Because they also know themselves that that's important. So it doesn't matter where you are along the chain, whether you're a parent, whether you're an educator, or whether you're in the workplace. Perfectionism is emphasized and amplified, and that's why safety is so important. If you within your team can make new employees know that it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to hit roadblocks and find things tough, but what's most important is that you keep persevering. Same with kids, if they make a mistake or they didn't do very well in a task or a school report, tell them it's okay, give them a hug, treat them exactly the same as you would if they did well, because it's that unconditionality of regard which teaches people that they don't need to rely on other people's approval. And no matter how well they do, as long as they're trying, that's the most important thing.
So we're talking about like the challenges of perfectionism. And I think there's this sort of all or nothing thinking that can happen. And I certainly do it. It's like either I'm being a perfectionist or I'm overdoing things, or I'm lazy. It's like there's no in between. But you talk about some of these things like being meticulous, being conscientious, being diligent, and those actually being things that are valuable. So how do we distinguish between when we're being perfectionistic and when we're employing some of these actually like more powerful ways of showing up to get work done, or to, parent our kids, or to, be good in relationship, all the things we're trying to do?
Well, it's where it starts. That's so crucial. If we are consumed by worry about what other people are thinking or about the consequences of not doing something, then that's going to be perfectionism. That's going to be anxious energy that's used to work harder, push our kids more, push our team more, to the point at which, we become unhappy in ourselves, but also unhappy in our households or unhappy in our workplaces. Anxious energy is not a productive way to strive. But if you can hold on to the high standards, if you can hold on to a sense of meticulousness, diligence, as you said, but manage to rid from those things a sense of insecurity and worry, that's where you're into a zone of high performance. And the way that you do that is to simply reconnect with purpose and reconnect with the reason why you're doing these things in the first place. If you take the workplace, we all enter into professions because we had an interest at some level. But through the process of
it's so simple, but it's so true.
Going up the ladder or getting into the weeds of our jobs, we kind of forget that because we just go from day to day. So I'm not saying this is easy, but I do think that it's very, very important that not only do we think about our career and our career prospects, but we also try to hold on to why it is we're doing this. And every day try to find something of the purpose in our work, because that's where the high standards come from. Like, that's where the excellence comes from. And that gives us also space to make mistakes, because we see them as learning opportunities, not terrible examples where we've slipped up and everybody's found out. We're not worried about those things so much because we're focused more on creating, producing, than we are on not looking bad.
I love the going back to like, I had an interest, and that's where it all started. I had a curiosity. And so how do I come back to that so that I can continue to sort of anchor myself in that curiosity, or rediscover the curiosity that I've lost because I've moved myself so far away from that through perfectionism. Yeah.
Well, I'm interested to know your story, because how is it that you found perfectionism? What are the sorts of things that you found effective?
I definitely am still working through it. My job today is one that I love, and I came to because of a sense of serious, deep interest and purpose in how we live meaningful lives. It's easy to get lost in wanting to do it so well, right? Because it feels so important. So I wouldn't say that I found the perfect, I wouldn't say that LOL, of course, perfect. I wouldn't say that I've found the fix. I'd say I'm still working through what that looks like.
Yeah, it's really tough. There's no life hack.
Yeah, right, correct.
Like we're all work in progress, like every single one of us, and we will always be right until the time that we retire and beyond.
Right.
And I think that's so important for us to hold in our minds, because if we constantly focus on perfecting ourselves, we're never ever going to feel like we're enough. And that goes to the root what perfectionism is. Deficit, right? So, and that applies not only to the way that we interact with our jobs, but also the way that we seek help and try to embrace self-help, not in a perfectionistic way, to be like, how can I do this perfectly?
Oh, I've gotten caught in that trap, yes.
But actually, like, what are the broad lessons that I can carry into the workplace or my parenting or whatever it might be, the broad philosophies that I can take, because there's no one perfect way to engage with work, but there are several important messages and philosophical ways to approach in work that will help us when it comes to our mental well-being and productivity. One of them is focusing on the vocation and the purpose that we talked about, and really making sure we remind ourselves of why we're in the workplace. One of them is being kind. One of them is making sure that we interact with people authentically, right? That we take the perfectionism away from our interactions. But it's not about, and this is how you do it, and this is the step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. I think it's just about a bit of a mindset shift, I suppose. And that's really, I think, the biggest way that you can overcome perfectionism is to embrace all of yourself. Exactly.
I don't think there's any real work that's like inner work or, that has kind of this like soft skill attached to it that is a 1, 2, 3 step thing. And so that can make growth feel elusive in some ways, and almost like we don't know when we're growing all the time. Like we aren't aware of it, right? And I always notice it's like I've grown because I can look back and go, oh, I reacted or responded to something differently. I should say I responded to something instead of reacting, right? And so that starts to show me growth and progress. But how have you seen yourself grow as you've done your own work on perfectionism, or how have you seen others in the lab grow?
Well, this is a really interesting point, because growth is a bit of a paradox. Growth doesn't thrive under conditions of abundance. When we feel like we're enough, it can only thrive under conditions of scarcity. When there's something more to
yeah.
do. And one of the things that I was very much zeroed in on in the book was this idea that what is really underneath the perfectionistic mindset is our sense that we have to continually do more, grow more, be more. And there's always a place for growth, of course there is. And especially when we're learning something new for the first time, we focus on growth, and the malleability of our skills is so, so important. But there also comes a stage where we have to sort of land the plane. Can't keep taking off, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the focus, I think, needs to flip from an incessant need to continue to improve ourselves to a sense of, okay, so what is it now, having elevated myself to a position maybe of management, or built a company, or, you become an academic, you got tenure, or whatever it might be. What now is going to make sure that what I'm doing is sustainable? Because I can't just continually hold myself in a pattern of growth. That's going to burn me out. And that's where the switch to vocation comes in, because now it's like, okay, what am I leaving in the world? What is this company going to leave in the world for other people to use? It's going to enrich their lives. It's going to make their lives better. That is a switch up in our minds from the pure focus on profit or aspiration or moving ourselves up the ladder to something that's a little bit more, actually a little bit broader, and that was much more sustainable. And I think that leads to a more rounded and sustainable life. So I'm not against growth or the growth mindset, but it's not good all the time, because left unchecked, it can turn itself into perfectionism.
Ooh, yeah. I think that's a big challenge too, because we were always talking about growth, and growth mindset took off, and that culture really gets cemented in work environments where you're always sharing a learning and a mistake. And so it's almost like the idea of growing and the idea of making mistakes and learning becomes performative, right? And even that can hold its own form of perfectionism, because you're sort of holding up this image of this person who is always growing. And so I do think that that's a really good, it's a really good point. It's an aha for me going from, what am I leaving behind, my legacy or my vocation?
Yeah, and it disarms perfectionism almost overnight. Because, even if we do make a mistake, those are just part and parcel of life, right? Like those are part and parcel of just being an imperfect human being in an imperfect planet. So those things don't hit us so hard if our bigger purpose is to leave something for other people to use. My grandfather's a carpenter. He was only interested in leaving things for other people to use. They still stand the test of time now, long after, sadly, he's no longer with us. You can see them in the pubs around Northamptonshire, where I grew up. That's legacy. That was his vocation. And yeah, okay, if he made a mistake on a job or did something that perhaps the client wasn't happy with, yeah, you would think, oh, that sucks. But it's not going to lose any sleep over it.
Right. Because,
he realizes that what's much more important is the bigger picture of his work. And I think that's the same for anyone. It's really interesting you bring up failure when it comes to growth, because one of the curious things about growth too is that when we're constantly looking to identify failure, setbacks as something that we can grow from, the implicit message that sends is that the failure or the mistake is shameful, right? It needs to be rehabilitated in some way on the redemptive arc of growth. So I think the other problem with growth is that it teaches us that mistakes and failure need in some way to be repaired, when sometimes they do. But sometimes they don't. Often it's the case. How many times in the workplace have you made a mistake, slipped up, and you knew what to do? Like you knew what you needed to do in that moment, but for just some reason, because we're fallible, we just made a mistake. There are all sorts of instances in failures and mistakes where there is no growing to do. And I think sometimes if we constantly need to grow, it robs us of an ability to just sit with that failure for a second and recognize that we're just human. And then make mistakes.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Yeah. And you can sit with that and you can accept it and, you can move on.
Is there anything else you'd want to leave with people around perfectionism, maybe that you've learned since releasing this book?
Well, what I've learned, like most from releasing the book, is that it's okay, like when people don't like something. Because when I was writing it, I was petrified that people would not like it. Right? It took me 3 years. My editor was ready to throttle me by the end of it, because she was just like, you've got to finish, Tom, stop editing, stop iterating. But I was so petrified that it wasn't going to be well received. And I was just forced to send it into the world. And this goes back to the vocation piece, right? Because now it's in the world for other people to read. And you got no control of that. And there's something you catastrophize these things. And then when you do get somebody who doesn't like it, you think, actually, it's okay. It's not the disaster I built it up in my mind. So the great lesson for me with the book was really that just send things out. Like, don't worry about reception. Put your best effort into the book. Make sure that you put your heart and soul into it, absolutely, but let it go. I think that's one of the big lessons I try to teach my students and anyone I interact with, that, there comes a point where you've got to let things go and just let the knowledge that you are giving something to the world be what the ultimate driving force behind what you do. And if you can do that, you realize suddenly that nothing else matters. It's not about you. It's not about the reception. It's just about the work. And so that's probably been the biggest lesson for me, that, done is better than perfect, and move forward, hopefully to the next book.
Yes. Can't wait. All right. I'm going to have you complete these 3 statements for me, Tom. Better humans are
empathetic, compassionate, and agile. And I think those are the 3 characteristics of good humans.
Better work is
quality over quantity.
And a better world has?
A better world has the same things as better humans have: more empathy, compassion, and courage to look at how we can make things better. I think if we spent more time trying to perfect our societies rather than to perfect ourselves, I think we'd be in a better place.
Ooh, I agree with that. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
That was Thomas Curran, psychology professor at the London School of Economics and author of The Perfection Trap: Embracing the Power of Good Enough. Everyday Better is a production of LinkedIn News. The show is produced by Grace Rubin and Emily Reeves. Asaf Gadron is our sound engineer. He makes sure we sound good in the studio. Tim Boland mixed our show. Sarah Storm is our senior producer. Dave Pond is head of news production. Maya Pope Chappelle is the director of content and audience development. Courtney Coop is head of LinkedIn original audio and video. Dan Roth is the editor-in-chief of LinkedIn. And I'm Leah Smart. Thanks for coming with me, and I'll see you next week.